Sarah Mitchell stared at the pile of dirty dishes in the kitchen sink, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. The morning sun streamed through the window, highlighting the chaos that had become her daily reality. Toys scattered across the living room floor, laundry overflowing from baskets, and the constant demands of managing a household with 3 young children had pushed her to her breaking point. Her husband David sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee. He seemed oblivious to the storm of activity around him, as their 6-year-old son Jake spilled cereal on the floor, 4-year-old Emma cried because she couldn't find her favorite doll, and baby Michael needed his diaper changed. Sarah felt like she was drowning in responsibilities while David remained in his own bubble. "David, can you please help Jake clean up that mess?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice while bouncing Michael on her hip. "In a minute," David mumbled, without looking up from his screen. "I'm checking some important work emails." Sarah bit her tongue. It was always work. Emails or an important call or some urgent project that needed his immediate attention. Meanwhile, she juggled everything else without complaint. She loved her family dearly, but the weight of managing everything alone was crushing her spirit day by day. As she wiped down the counter for the 3rd time that morning, Sarah's mind wandered to her friend Lisa's suggestion from the previous week. Lisa had hired a housegirl to help with cleaning and childcare, and she couldn't stop talking about how much it had improved her quality of life. At first, Sarah had dismissed the idea, thinking they couldn't afford it or that she should be able to handle everything herself. But watching David continue to ignore the chaos around him while she scrambled to manage 3 children and household chores made her reconsider. Maybe getting help wasn't admitting defeat. Maybe it was simply being practical about their situation. That evening, after the children were finally asleep, Sarah brought up the topic with David. They sat on their worn couch in the dimly lit living room, the television providing background noise to their conversation. "I've been thinking," Sarah began carefully, "maybe we should consider hiring someone to help around the house. Just a few days a week to help with cleaning and watching the kids." David looked up from his laptop, seemingly surprised by the suggestion. "A house girl? Sarah, we're not exactly swimming in money right now. My promotion is still pending, and with all the kids' expenses—" "I know money is tight, but think about it," Sarah interrupted gently. "If I had some help, I could maybe go back to work part-time. My old boss mentioned they had some freelance opportunities available. I could bring in extra income while still being here for the kids." David considered this, his business mind clearly calculating the potential financial benefits. Sarah knew he would respond better to the practical aspects rather than her emotional exhaustion, so she focused on the numbers and logistics. "Plus," she continued, "you've been working so much lately. If we had someone reliable to help with the house and kids, maybe you could focus more on your career without worrying about things at home. It could benefit both of us." This seemed to catch David's attention more effectively than her previous arguments. He closed his laptop and gave her his full focus for the first time in weeks. Sarah felt a small spark of hope that he might actually consider her proposal seriously. "How much would something like that cost?" he asked, already shifting into his analytical mode. Sarah had already done her research, knowing that David would want concrete numbers. "I called a few agencies today. For 3 days a week, about 6 hours each day, we're looking at around $800 a month. If I can pick up even part-time freelance work, I could easily cover that cost and bring in additional income." David nodded slowly, seeming to warm up to the idea as he processed the financial implications. "And you think this person would be trustworthy with the kids?" "The agency I spoke with does background checks and provides references. We could interview several candidates and choose someone we both feel comfortable with," Sarah explained, feeling more optimistic about the conversation than she had in months. They spent the next hour discussing the details, with David asking practical questions about responsibilities, schedules, and expectations. Sarah was relieved that he seemed genuinely interested in making it work rather than dismissing her idea outright. By the end of their conversation, they had agreed to contact the agency and set up interviews with potential candidates. Sarah felt lighter than she had in weeks, imagining having a few hours to herself or being able to focus on work without constantly being interrupted by household demands. The next morning, Sarah called the agency first thing and explained their situation. The receptionist was professional and understanding, walking her through their process and assuring her that they specialized in matching families with reliable, experienced housegirls who could handle both cleaning and childcare duties. "We have several excellent candidates available," the woman explained. "I can schedule interviews for this weekend if that works for your family. We typically recommend meeting with at least 3 different people to find the best fit." Sarah scheduled interviews for Saturday afternoon, giving her and David time to prepare questions and discuss what qualities they were looking for in a house girl. She felt excited about the possibility of having help and maybe even reclaiming some aspects of her old life. That week, Sarah found herself daydreaming about what life might be like with assistance. She could take long baths without being interrupted, maybe meet friends for coffee, or simply read a book in peace. The prospect of having someone capable and reliable to share the household burden filled her with anticipation. David also seemed more engaged in the process than she had expected. He helped her compile a list of questions for the interviews and even suggested they prepare a trial period to see how well their chosen candidate would work with their family dynamics. As Saturday approached, Sarah felt nervous but optimistic. She had no way of knowing that this decision to hire help would set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform their marriage and family in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the simplest solutions lead to the most unexpected complications. Saturday afternoon arrived with Sarah nervously adjusting furniture and making sure the house looked presentable for their interviews. David had taken the children to his mother's house for the day, giving them privacy to meet with potential candidates without distractions. Sarah appreciated his thoughtfulness in handling this detail without her having to ask. The first candidate arrived precisely on time. Mrs. Rodriguez was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and a warm smile that immediately put Sarah at ease. She had over 15 years of experience with families and came with glowing references from her previous employers. Her English was clear, and she answered all their questions with confidence and professionalism. "I understand you have 3 young children," Mrs. Rodriguez said, settling comfortably into their living room chair. "This is actually my specialty. I raised 4 children of my own and have been helping families for many years. Children need structure but also patience and understanding." Sarah and David exchanged approving glances as Mrs. Rodriguez described her approach to child care and household management. She seemed reliable, experienced, and genuinely caring. Sarah could easily imagine trusting her with the children and feeling confident about leaving them in her care. The second interview was with a younger woman named Jessica, who was in her early 20s and full of energy. She had recently graduated from college with a degree in early childhood education, but was looking for practical experience before pursuing a teaching career. While she lacked extensive professional experience, her enthusiasm and educational background impressed both Sarah and David. "I love working with children," Jessica explained brightly. "I did my internship at a daycare center and really enjoyed helping kids learn and grow. I'm also very organized and detail-oriented, which I think would help with managing household tasks efficiently." Jessica's references were solid, though more limited than Mrs. Rodriguez's. She seemed eager to prove herself and quoted a slightly lower rate than the more experienced candidate. Sarah found herself torn between the security of experience and the fresh perspective that Jessica might bring to their household. Then Maria arrived for their final interview, and everything changed. Maria was probably in her mid-20s with long, dark hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through their windows. She moved with natural grace, and had the kind of effortless beauty that made heads turn without any apparent effort on her part. When she smiled, it was dazzling and completely genuine, lighting up her entire face. Sarah noticed David's reaction immediately. He sat up straighter in his chair and smoothed down his hair unconsciously. His voice took on a different tone when he spoke to Maria, more animated and engaged than he had been with the previous candidates. Sarah felt a small knot of uneasiness form in her stomach, but she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was being ridiculous. "I have 3 years of experience working with families," Maria explained in lightly accented English. "I came here from Colombia 2 years ago to build a better life. I love children very much, and I take great pride in keeping a home clean and organized. For me, this is not just work, but a way to help families be happy together." Maria's references were good, though not as extensive as Mrs. Rodriguez's. What struck Sarah most was her genuine warmth and the way she seemed to truly care about making a positive difference in people's lives. When she talked about her previous families, her eyes lit up with affection, and she shared small stories that showed her attention to detail and emotional connection with the children she had cared for. "What are your long-term goals?" David asked, leaning forward in his chair with obvious interest. "I am studying English at night school," Maria replied, her smile never wavering. "Someday I hope to bring my younger sister here from Colombia. She is very smart and wants to study medicine. For now, I want to help families like yours while I improve my English and save money for her future." Sarah found herself genuinely moved by Maria's story and her dedication to her family. Despite her initial uneasiness about David's reaction, she couldn't deny that Maria seemed like a genuinely caring person who would treat their children with love and attention. After Maria left, Sarah and David sat down to compare notes and make their decision. The conversation that followed would prove to be more significant than either of them realized at the time. "So what do you think?" Sarah asked, settling back onto the couch with a cup of coffee. "They were all good candidates," David replied, but Sarah noticed he seemed distracted, his mind clearly still processing the interviews. "Mrs. Rodriguez obviously has the most experience, which is important with 3 kids." "She did seem very reliable," Sarah agreed. "But Jessica was enthusiastic, and her education background could be valuable. Plus, she's a bit more affordable." David nodded absently, then added, "Maria seemed really dedicated, though. Did you hear her story about working extra hours to help her previous family when their youngest got sick? That shows real commitment." Sarah studied her husband's face as he spoke about Maria. There was something different in his expression, a kind of interest that went beyond professional consideration. She told herself she was imagining things, that her exhaustion was making her paranoid about innocent interactions. "Her English is very good, too," David continued, "and she mentioned she's taking classes to improve it even more. That shows initiative and a desire to better herself." "All 3 of them seem capable," Sarah said carefully, watching David's reaction. "Who do you think would be the best fit for our family?" David was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider the question seriously. "Honestly, I think Maria might be our best choice. She has enough experience to handle the job, but she's also eager to prove herself. Plus, her rate is reasonable, and she genuinely seems to care about the families she works with." Sarah felt that knot in her stomach tighten slightly, but she couldn't argue with David's reasoning. Maria did seem like a good choice based on her qualifications and personality. Maybe Sarah's concerns were unfounded, rooted in her own insecurities rather than any real problems with the candidate. "You don't think Mrs. Rodriguez's experience gives her an advantage?" Sarah asked, giving David one more chance to reconsider. "Experience is important," David acknowledged, "but sometimes fresh perspective and genuine enthusiasm can be just as valuable. Maria seems hungry to do a good job, and I think that motivation could really benefit our family." In the end, they decided to offer Maria the position. Sarah called her that evening and was delighted by the excitement and gratitude in Maria's voice when she accepted. They arranged for her to start the following Monday, giving Sarah a few days to prepare the children for having someone new in the house. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Finally, she would have the help she desperately needed. What she couldn't have predicted was how dramatically this decision would reshape the dynamics of her marriage and challenge everything she thought she knew about her relationship with David. Monday morning arrived with Sarah feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for Maria's first day. She had spent Sunday evening preparing instructions for the children's routines, meal preferences, and house rules. The children were curious about having someone new in their home, with Jake asking endless questions about what the house girl would do and whether she would play games with them. Maria arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed professionally in dark jeans and a crisp white blouse. She carried a small bag with her personal items and wore that same warm smile that had impressed Sarah and David during the interview. Sarah immediately felt some of her anxiety melt away as Maria greeted the children with genuine enthusiasm. "Good morning, Jake. Good morning, Emma," Maria said, crouching down to their eye level. "I am so excited to spend time with you today. I brought some coloring books from my country that I thought you might like." The children responded positively to her attention, with even shy Emma warming up when Maria showed her the colorful books featuring animals from Colombia. Baby Michael seemed content in Maria's arms when Sarah handed him over, which was often a good indicator of whether someone would work well with their family. Sarah spent the first hour walking Maria through their daily routines, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the children's individual needs and preferences. Maria asked thoughtful questions and took notes in a small notebook, demonstrating the kind of attention to detail that Sarah had hoped for. "Jake has a peanut allergy, so we have to be very careful about snacks," Sarah explained as they organized the kitchen. "His EpiPen is in this cabinet, and there's another one in his backpack. Emma is going through a phase where she only wants to wear dresses, and fighting her on it just makes everything harder." "I understand completely," Maria nodded. "My previous family's daughter went through the same thing. Sometimes it is easier to work with children's preferences than against them, as long as they are not harmful." David appeared in the kitchen just as Sarah was finishing her instructions. He was dressed for work in his best suit, and Sarah noticed that he had taken extra care with his appearance that morning. His hair was perfectly styled, and he was wearing cologne, which was unusual for a regular workday. "Good morning, Maria," David said with a bright smile. "I hope Sarah isn't overwhelming you with too much information on your first day." Maria laughed, a musical sound that filled the kitchen. "Not at all, Mr. Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell is being very thorough, which I appreciate. It shows how much she cares about her children and wants them to be safe and happy." Sarah watched the interaction between her husband and their new house girl, noting how David's posture changed when he spoke to Maria. He stood taller, gestured more animatedly, and his voice took on a lighter, more engaging tone. When Maria responded, David listened with complete attention, as if her words were the most interesting thing he had heard all week. "Well, I should get going," David said, but he seemed reluctant to leave. "Maria, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call. Sarah will give you all our contact information, but I want you to feel comfortable reaching out if there are any problems." After David left for work, Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She spent another hour with Maria, then decided to test the waters by running a quick errand to the grocery store. It would be a good way to see how Maria handled the children on her own and give Sarah her first taste of freedom in months. "I'll just be gone for about an hour," Sarah explained. "The children have had breakfast, but Emma might want a snack around 10. There are fruit pouches in the pantry that she likes." When Sarah returned from the store, she found the house surprisingly peaceful. Maria was sitting on the living room floor with Jake and Emma, helping them build an elaborate castle with blocks, while Michael napped peacefully in his playpen. The kitchen was spotless, and Sarah noticed that Maria had even folded the laundry that had been sitting in the basket. For 2 days. How did everything go? Sarah asked, genuinely impressed by the scene of domestic tranquility. Very well, Maria replied with a smile. Jake showed me his favorite toys, and Emma taught me a song she learned at preschool. Michael went down for his nap without any fussing. They are wonderful children, Mrs. Mitchell. You have done a beautiful job raising them. The compliment warmed Sarah's heart more than she had expected. It had been so long since anyone had acknowledged her efforts as a mother or recognized how hard she worked to create a loving environment for her family. The first week with Maria exceeded all of Sarah's expectations. The house stayed cleaner than it had been in years. The children were happy and well cared for, and Sarah finally had time to breathe. She was able to take long showers, catch up on phone calls with friends, and even start exploring the freelance opportunities her former boss had mentioned. However, she began noticing small changes in David's behavior that made her increasingly uncomfortable. He started coming home for lunch more often, claiming he needed to check on how things were going with the new arrangement. He would linger in conversations with Maria, asking about her day, her English classes, and her family back in Colombia. Sarah told herself this was just David being friendly and welcoming, but something felt different about the attention he paid to their housegirl. On Thursday evening, Sarah was preparing dinner when she overheard David and Maria talking in the living room. She couldn't make out all the words, but David's laughter was more frequent and genuine than she had heard in months. When she peeked around the corner, she saw David sitting on the edge of the couch, leaning forward as Maria showed him pictures, on her phone, probably of her family in Colombia. Your sister is beautiful, David was saying. She looks a lot like you. You must miss her terribly. Yes, very much, Maria replied softly. But I know that what I am doing here will help her. Have better opportunities. It is worth the sacrifice. Sarah watched as David's expression grew thoughtful and sympathetic. He was looking at Maria with an intensity that Sarah recognized but hadn't seen directed at herself in years. It was the same look he used to give her when they first met, when he hung on her every word and seemed genuinely fascinated by her thoughts and feelings. That night, as they prepared for bed, Sarah decided to address her concerns directly rather than let them fester in her mind. Maria seems to be working out really well, she began carefully. The kids love her, and the house has never been so organized. She's definitely exceeded expectations, David agreed, seeming pleased with the topic. She's so dedicated and hardworking. And she's great with the kids. Jake was telling me about the games she taught him from Colombia. You seem to talk with her quite a bit, Sarah observed, trying to keep her tone neutral. David looked at her with surprise. What do you mean? I'm just being friendly and making sure she feels welcome. Isn't that what we should do with someone who's helping our family? Sarah studied her husband's face, looking for signs of deception or guilt. But he seemed genuinely puzzled by her comment. Maybe she was reading too much into innocent interactions. Maybe her own insecurities were making her paranoid about a situation that was actually working perfectly for their family. But deep down, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in her household, and she wasn't sure she would like where those changes were leading. 3 weeks into Maria's employment, Sarah's concerns had grown from whispers of doubt into a constant background noise in her mind. She tried to focus on the positive aspects of having help, and there were many. Her freelance work was picking up, bringing in steady income that more than covered Maria's wages. The children were thriving under Maria's care, learning Spanish words and developing better eating habits thanks to the nutritious meals she prepared. Yet Sarah couldn't ignore the subtle changes in David's behavior. He had started working from home more frequently, claiming that his home office was quieter and more productive than his crowded workplace. While this excuse seemed reasonable, Sarah noticed that his productivity seemed to peak during the hours when Maria was in the house. David had also begun taking an unusual interest in household matters that had never concerned him before. He would ask detailed questions about Maria's day, compliment her cooking, and offer to help with tasks that he had previously ignored completely. When Sarah mentioned these changes to her friend Lisa, Lisa had laughed and said she wished her husband would show half as much interest in their domestic life. But Sarah's intuition told her something more complicated was developing under her roof. The situation came to a head on a Tuesday morning when Sarah was supposed to meet with a potential client about a major freelance project. She had been preparing for this meeting for weeks, knowing it could lead to a long-term contract that would significantly boost their financial security. Maria was scheduled to watch the children, and David was supposedly working from his home office. 20 minutes before Sarah was supposed to leave, baby Michael developed a sudden fever and became inconsolable. Sarah's maternal instincts kicked in immediately, and she knew she couldn't leave him when he was unwell. Reluctantly, she called her client to reschedule, disappointed but knowing she had made the right choice. After settling Michael with some infant acetaminophen and getting him comfortable for a nap, Sarah realized she needed to let Maria know about the change in plans. She walked toward the kitchen to find Maria, but stopped short when she heard voices coming from David's home office. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Sarah could see David and Maria sitting much closer, together than any professional conversation required. David was leaning forward in his desk chair while Maria perched on the edge of his desk, her long hair falling over her shoulder as she listened intently to whatever he was saying. "You're so talented," David was saying in a voice Sarah barely recognized. "I had no idea you were interested in business. Have you ever thought about taking some classes? I could help you look into programs that might be good for someone with your intelligence and drive." Maria's face lit up with gratitude and excitement. "You would really help me with that? I have always dreamed of maybe starting my own business, someday, but I never knew where to begin." "Of course I'd help you," David replied, and Sarah watched in shock as her husband reached out to gently touch Maria's hand. "Someone as special as you deserves every opportunity to succeed. I'd be happy to mentor you, help you navigate the system, maybe even introduce you to some contacts who could open doors." Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest as she witnessed this intimate conversation. The way David was looking at Maria, the tone of his voice, the physical contact, it all painted a picture that Sarah couldn't deny or rationalize away any longer. This wasn't just friendly conversation between employer and employee. This was her husband flirting with their housegirl, offering her special attention and opportunities that went far beyond their professional arrangement. Maria seemed to glow under David's attention, responding with the kind of animated enthusiasm that Sarah remembered from their early dating days. She was telling David about her dreams and aspirations, sharing personal details about her hopes for the future, while David listened with the focused intensity of someone who was genuinely captivated. Sarah backed away from the door quietly, her mind racing as she processed what she had witnessed. She felt betrayed, angry, and hurt, but also strangely vindicated that her instincts had been correct. The late lunch breaks, the extra attention to his appearance, the sudden interest in household management. It all made perfect sense now, for the rest of that day, Sarah struggled to act normally around both David and Maria. She watched their interactions with new eyes, noticing small gestures and glances that she had previously dismissed. The way David's hand would linger when he handed Maria her paycheck. The way Maria's face would brighten whenever David entered the room. The private jokes and shared smiles that seemed to exclude Sarah from conversations in her own home. That evening, after Maria had gone home and the children were asleep, Sarah confronted David directly. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the living room where they had originally discussed hiring Maria. The irony wasn't lost on her that they were back to the same spot where this situation had begun. David looked up from his laptop, immediately sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's going on? You've seemed upset all day." "I saw you with Maria this morning," Sarah said simply, watching his face for any sign of guilt or recognition. "In your office. I came to tell her about Michael being sick, and I saw the two of you having what looked like a very personal conversation." David's expression shifted slightly, but he maintained eye contact. "Sarah, I don't know what you think you saw, but Maria and I were just talking. She mentioned being interested in business, so I offered to give her some advice. There's nothing inappropriate about encouraging someone who works for us." "It wasn't just the conversation, David," Sarah replied, her voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside her. "It was the way you were looking at her, the way you were sitting so close, the way you touched her hand. I've been watching for weeks now, and this isn't about being encouraging or supportive. This is about you being attracted to our house girl." The accusation hung in the air between them like a challenge. David was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him calculating his response, deciding how much to admit or deny. "Sarah, I think you're overreacting," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Maria is a lovely person, and yes, I enjoy talking with her. She's intelligent and interesting, and she brings a positive energy to our house. But that doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening." "David, I'm not stupid," Sarah said, her frustration finally breaking through her controlled facade. "I know the difference between being friendly with an employee and being attracted to someone. I've been married to you for 8 years. I know how you act when you're interested in a woman, because that's how you used to act with me." This seemed to hit David harder than her previous accusations. He closed his laptop and looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt, defensiveness, and something else Sarah couldn't quite identify. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" he asked quietly. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would fundamentally change their marriage regardless of how David responded. "I'm saying that hiring Maria was supposed to help our marriage by taking pressure off me," she said. "But instead, it feels like I've brought another woman into my house who's getting the attention and interest that used to be mine. I'm saying that I think you're developing feelings for her, and I don't know what to do about it." The silence that followed Sarah's confrontation stretched between them like a chasm. David stared at his hands, his jaw working as if he were struggling to find the right words. When he finally looked up, Sarah saw something in his eyes that confirmed her worst fears, not defiance or anger, but recognition and shame. "Sarah, David started, then stopped, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I never meant for anything to happen. I never planned this." The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow, even though she had been preparing herself for it. Hearing David acknowledge that something was indeed happening made it real in a way that her suspicions hadn't. She felt tears threatening, but she forced herself to stay composed. She needed to understand the full extent of what she was dealing with. "So you admit that you have feelings for her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how much truth he was willing to share. "I don't know what I feel," he finally said. She's different. She's enthusiastic about everything, grateful for small kindnesses, interested in what I have to say. When I talk to her, I feel like the person I used to be before we got so caught up in bills and schedules and responsibilities. Each word felt like a knife twisting in Sarah's chest. She recognized the implicit criticism of their marriage, the suggestion that somehow she had become boring or demanding compared to the exciting, grateful Maria. "So this is my fault?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of her voice. "I'm sorry that raising your children and managing your household isn't as exciting as flirting with a beautiful young woman who thinks you're wonderful." "That's not what I meant," David protested, but his denial lacked conviction. "Sarah, our marriage has been difficult lately. We barely talk anymore except about practical things. We don't laugh together. We don't share our dreams. We don't even really see each other most days. Maria reminds me of what it feels like to connect with someone, to feel appreciated and interesting. Sarah stared at her husband, trying to process the layers of betrayal in his words. Not only was he admitting to emotional infidelity, but he was blaming their marriage problems for his attraction to another woman. The logical part of her mind recognized some truth in his observations about their relationship, but the wounded part of her heart couldn't accept that as justification for what was happening. "Have you touched her?" Sarah asked bluntly, needing to know the full scope of the situation. "Have you kissed her? Have you told her how you feel?" David's face reddened, but he maintained eye contact. "No, Sarah, I haven't crossed any physical lines. I'm not having an affair. I've enjoyed talking with her, and maybe I've been more friendly than I should have been." Sarah wanted to believe him, but she also knew that emotional affairs could be just as damaging as physical ones. The intimacy she had witnessed between David and Maria that morning went far beyond appropriate employer-employee interaction. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, feeling exhausted by the conversation and overwhelmed by the implications for their family. "Do we fire Maria? Do we pretend this conversation never happened? Do we go to marriage counseling and hope we can fix whatever made you vulnerable to this situation?" David looked genuinely torn, and Sarah realized with growing alarm that he wasn't immediately jumping at the chance to fix their marriage or cut ties with Maria. He was actually considering his options, weighing his feelings for Maria against his commitment to his family. "I don't know," David admitted. "Sarah, I love you and I love our children. I never wanted to hurt anyone or complicate our lives, but I also can't just turn off whatever I'm feeling, and I can't pretend that our marriage hasn't been struggling for a long time." Before Sarah could respond, they heard the front door open and Maria's cheerful voice calling out a greeting. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that Maria had arrived for her Thursday evening shift to help with dinner and bedtime routines, something they had arranged to give Sarah more time to work on her freelance projects. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell?" Maria called, her footsteps approaching the living room. "I hope it is okay that I came a little early. I brought some ingredients to make empanadas with the children, if that sounds good." Sarah and David looked at each other, both realizing how awkward and painful this situation had become. They couldn't very well continue their marriage-defining conversation with Maria in the house, but they also couldn't pretend that nothing had changed. Maria appeared in the doorway, her arms full of grocery bags and her face bright with enthusiasm. She looked so genuinely happy to be there, so excited about the small gift she was bringing to their family, that Sarah felt a complicated mix of anger and sympathy. Maria had no idea that her presence was destroying a marriage, or that the kind attention she had been receiving from David was causing so much pain. "That sounds lovely, Maria," Sarah managed to say, forcing a smile. "The children would love to learn how to make empanadas. Why don't you get started, and David and I will be with you in just a moment." Maria beamed and headed toward the kitchen, humming softly to herself. Sarah and David sat in heavy silence until they heard her greeting the children with her usual warmth and enthusiasm. "We can't continue this conversation with her here," Sarah whispered. "But David, this situation can't continue. Whatever you're feeling, whatever problems we have in our marriage, we can't work through them with Maria in the middle of everything." David nodded reluctantly. "You're right. But Sarah, firing her feels cruel when she's done nothing wrong. She doesn't even know there's a problem." "The problem isn't what she's done," Sarah replied firmly. "The problem is what you've allowed to develop. Maria is a victim in this too, but I won't sacrifice my marriage to protect her feelings." They agreed to table their discussion until after Maria left that evening, but the hours that followed were torture for Sarah. She watched David interact with Maria, noting every smile, every laugh, every moment of connection between them. She saw how Maria, Friday morning, arrived with an atmosphere of tension that seemed to fill every corner of the house. Sarah had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling while David tossed restlessly beside her. They had agreed that David would speak with Maria that morning and give her 2 weeks' notice, along with an offer to help her find a new position. Sarah dreaded the conversation, knowing it would be painful for everyone involved. Maria arrived at her usual time, bringing the promised ingredients for Colombian breakfast and radiating her typical enthusiasm. She seemed completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf her, chatting happily about her evening English class and asking about the children's plans for the weekend. Sarah busied herself getting the children ready for their day, trying to give David privacy for the difficult conversation he needed to have. She could hear their voices from the kitchen, starting with Maria's cheerful chatter about the breakfast she wanted to prepare, then shifting to David's more serious tone as he asked her to sit down for a moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah found herself straining to hear what was happening, torn between wanting to know how Maria was taking the news and feeling guilty about eavesdropping on such a personal moment. When Maria's voice returned, it was different, confused, hurt, and increasingly distressed as David apparently tried to explain the situation without revealing the full truth about his feelings. Sarah heard fragments of the conversation. David mentioning changes in their household needs, Sarah's successful freelance work reducing their requirement for help, budget considerations that made her position unnecessary. "But I thought everything was going so well," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "The children are happy. Mrs. Mitchell seems pleased with my work, and you said just yesterday that I was doing an excellent job. Did I do something wrong? Please tell me so I can fix it." Sarah's heart broke listening to Maria's distress. The young woman clearly had no idea what had really prompted this sudden dismissal, and David's vague explanations were only adding to her confusion and pain. "Maria, you haven't done anything wrong," David assured her, his own voice strained. "This isn't about your performance. You've been wonderful with the children and incredibly helpful to our family. This is just circumstances have changed, and we need to make some adjustments." There was another long silence, and then Sarah heard something that made her stomach drop, the sound of Maria crying. Not just tears, but the kind of deep, heartbroken sobs that come from genuine devastation. "I'm sorry," Maria managed between sobs. I thought I had finally found a good situation. I thought maybe I could stay here for a long time, help the children grow up, save money for my sister's education. I don't understand what changed so suddenly." Sarah couldn't stand listening anymore. Against her better judgment, she went to the kitchen doorway and saw Maria sitting at their breakfast table with tears streaming down her face, while David stood nearby looking helpless and anguished. The scene was even more painful than Sarah had imagined. "Maria," Sarah said gently, entering the kitchen despite David's surprised look, "I'm so sorry this is upsetting. David is right that you haven't done anything wrong. You've been wonderful to our family." Maria looked up at Sarah, with red-rimmed eyes, clearly searching for some explanation that would make sense of this sudden rejection. "Mrs. Mitchell, if it's about money, I could take less pay. If it's about my schedule, I could be more flexible. I really need this job, and I thought you were happy with my work." Sarah felt tears threatening her own eyes as she looked at this young woman who was so desperately trying to hold on to a position that was destroying Sarah's marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her that Maria was fighting to stay in a situation that was causing pain for everyone involved, completely unaware of the real reason she was being dismissed. "It's not about money or your schedule," Sarah said carefully. "Sometimes situations change in ways that nobody expects or plans for. We want to help you find another position, hopefully one that offers even better opportunities than we can provide." David jumped in with obvious relief at Sarah's diplomatic approach. "I've already reached out to several contacts about families who might be looking for someone with your skills and experience. I think we can find you a position that pays better and offers more opportunities for advancement." Maria wiped her eyes with a tissue David offered, trying to compose herself. "You would really help me find another job, even though you're letting me go?" "Of course," David said, and Sarah noticed how his voice softened when he spoke directly to Maria. "You're talented and dedicated, and any family would be lucky to have you. I want to make sure you land somewhere that appreciates what you have to offer." Over the next hour, they worked out the details of Maria's departure. She would continue working for the remaining 2 weeks while David helped her interview with other families. Sarah watched this process with mixed emotions, grateful that they were handling the situation humanely, but still concerned about David's continued involvement in Maria's life. The following 2 weeks were some of the most challenging in Sarah's marriage. David threw himself into helping Maria find new employment with an enthusiasm that seemed to confirm Sarah's worst fears about his feelings. He made phone calls on her behalf, arranged interviews, and even offered to provide transportation to meetings with potential employers. Sarah found herself in the surreal position of watching her husband court another woman's future while claiming he was trying to save their marriage. Every conversation about Maria's job prospects, every update on her interview process, every moment of David's obvious concern for her welfare felt like another small betrayal. Maria, meanwhile, seemed to blossom under David's attention and advocacy. Her initial devastation about losing her position transformed into excitement about new possibilities, and she began talking about opportunities for advancement and better pay that she had never imagined possible. Sarah realized that David's assistance was indeed beneficial for Maria's career, but watching their collaboration felt like watching the development of a partnership that excluded her. 3 days before Maria's final day, David came home with news that a prominent family in the neighboring town had offered Maria a position that paid significantly more than what they had been providing, along with opportunities for continuing education and potential advancement within their small business empire. They were so impressed with her, David told Sarah enthusiastically. They said she was exactly what they were looking for, someone intelligent, dedicated, and eager to grow. She'll be making almost twice what we were paying her, and they're going to help her enroll in business classes at the community college. Sarah looked at her husband's animated expression and realized that he seemed happier about Maria's success than he had about anything related to their own family in months. The realization was devastating, confirming that David's emotional investment in Maria went far beyond appropriate concern for a former employee. "That's wonderful for her," Sarah managed to say. "I'm sure she's grateful for all your help in making this happen." "She is," David replied, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, we both should feel good about helping someone improve their situation. It's the right thing to do." But Sarah knew that David's motivation went far beyond doing the right thing. She could see that helping Maria succeed had become a way for him to maintain connection with her, to continue being important in her life even after she was no longer part of their household. On Maria's final day, she prepared a special farewell dinner for the family, cooking dishes from her homeland and teaching the children traditional Colombian games. The evening felt like a celebration of everything positive she had brought to their lives, and Sarah found herself genuinely sad to see her go despite everything that had happened. As Maria hugged the children goodbye, promising to stay in touch and visit when possible, Sarah saw tears in David's eyes. When Maria turned to thank him for all his help with finding her new position, their embrace lasted longer than Sarah was comfortable with, and she saw them exchange what looked like promises to maintain contact. After Maria left, the house felt strangely empty despite the return to their previous routine. The children asked about her constantly. David seemed distracted and melancholy, and Sarah found herself wondering whether removing Maria from their daily lives would be enough to repair the damage that had been done to their marriage. 2 weeks later, Sarah discovered that David had been texting with Maria regularly, ostensibly to check on how she was adjusting to her new position, but clearly maintaining the emotional connection that had developed between them. The discovery forced Sarah to confront the reality that simply removing Maria from their house hadn't resolved the fundamental problems in their relationship. The conversation that followed would determine whether their marriage could survive. This crisis, or whether David's feelings for Maria had irreparably damaged their ability to rebuild trust and intimacy. Sarah realized that hiring help for her household had indeed changed everything, just not in the ways she had hoped and expected.